The session is going to focus on the role that technology and I guess accessible systems can play in supporting people who are blind or who have low vision, and what we can do to help learners to exploit technology to support their learning. As we'll see, this is not an exact science, but it's an area that not only focuses on specific tools that learners may use, but also the culture, the infrastructure, and the learning environments that scaffold, if you like, and support learner independence. With that in mind today, I don't really plan to spend a lot of time unpacking information about specific or discrete software or hardware tools, but rather to look at the wider issues and to touch on the ways that technology can enable learners, and I guess what institutions can do to evaluate any unintended actions that sometimes can be present for learners with vision loss. I'll focus on four main themes that support students throughout the session and what, in terms of what organisations can do. So we'll focus on digital diversity, content clarity, available assets and procurement. But before we start, I wondered if I could just get an idea of you and your particular role, and I wondered if I could ask George to share the poll. If you could just take a second just to tell me what's the closest sort of description of your role or your area of work in general terms. Great, okay, so we have disability, learning support, and if your role is other, could you just add what that might be in the chat pane? That would be great. It's just helpful to get an idea, and also just, if you can just maybe just highlight, your role, if you've had any experience working with students with vision loss, that would be great. So Matt, training and support for sight and sound, great. I wondered about if anybody else has any other experience of working with students with sight loss, then please do add it in the pane. But we're going to continue. Great, Matt, Jaws trainer, fantastic. We're going to continue now and really consider a couple of different students, and you give ourselves a frame of reference to think about a couple of people and their own situations. So here we have Federica, who's a graduate who is blind. She lives in the city centre in a flat. She's a graduate trainee for a disability organisation. So when she moved into a new flat, she received support to settle in, but now she lives, works and travels independently. As well as engaging with her clients in her own jobs, her role involves reading, producing reports, responding to emails, promoting resources via social media, particularly Facebook. She's a very competent technology user. She uses a Windows laptop and she uses JAWS for Windows screen reading software to access information. She sometimes, as we can see in the screen, uses a refreshable braille display, which she can Bluetooth to her computer or to her mobile device. She's an iPad, iPhone user, so for her, iOS devices have been particularly important. The built-in voiceover has been particularly helpful for her. So that's Federica. Vikram is another individual who has low vision. He's a final year honours student at a university. He lives in a flat near his place of study. With Vikram, he finds that at night time when it gets darker, he experiences night blindness. So darker environments are more challenging for him. In the past, he was a Windows user, but he's migrated the last few years over to Macs because Vikram feels that although they're more expensive, that he really likes the inbuilt accessibility features, and they handle most of what he needs, and he doesn't have to rely on what he sees as expensive auxiliary software, where maybe it's needing upgraded regularly. But in terms of the support that Vikram gets, the disability service, the programme tutor, and the library staff work closely together to get reading lists at an early stage for Vikram so that he can access his course information and the reading lists in alternative formats. If they don't exist electronically, then it needs to be converted and accessed as early as possible. But what Vikram does is, as well as the software that he uses, he also has a couple of pieces of hardware. He carries a portable magnifier with a light on it to help him when he's out and about. Again, he relies heavily on his mobile devices to keep him in touch with friends. He uses his magnification software voiceover, screen reading. He inverts the colour and tints, the colour of the screen, inverts that to make it easier to read. He often uses his phone camera to take an image of a sign or a timetable and magnifies it to make it easier to read. So that's just a kind of baseline, and I know that if a few of you already have been working with people with low or no vision, then these scenarios might be familiar. So we know that Federica mainly listens to text by reading what's on the screen using her screen reading software. Sometimes Vikram does too, but not always. When they would use a screen reader, you'd be using the keyboard commands, tabbing from left to right to access content on Word, PDF and the web. Vikram magnifies text using the inbuilt zoom and the screen reader on his Mac. They're both, as I mentioned, big iPhone users. They both use voiceover on their phones, swiping the screen on their mobile device, double tapping to access. So, you know, they're both of these young people, they're both millennials, they're both, you know, fairly young, and they come from a culture where, according to some sources, 53% of millennials would rather lose their sense of smell than be disconnected from their technology. And I guess mobile technology has been an absolute game changer for people with low and no vision, particularly iOS devices. And these are both two young people that I've worked with, and speaking to both of them, it wasn't the accessible apps on their phone designed for people with low vision that they liked most. They both said that it was the everyday apps, the everyday features that were both most useful for supporting their productivity and their independence. They access websites to buy content online, to book rail travel, to catch up with news, to read documents, to read coursework, to catch up with friends, you know, using social media. And I guess the big thing and the most important thing was that these everyday tools that we all access were accessible. And this is going to be something that we look at and we consider. You know, Vikram talked about using a budgeting app called Monzo, which he really liked because it helped him to keep track of his finances and digitally keep an eye on where he was in terms of his expenditure. So the common thing about all these things is that they have been designed with access in mind. So I'm just wondering about the challenges that Vikram and Federica might experience, and I wondered if I could ask you just to add into the chat pane for a minute or two. What challenges do you think they might experience in accessing everyday information or content based on what we've just been talking about? Could I ask you to have a think and maybe add any thoughts into the chat pane, please? So what kind of challenges do you think that either Vikram or Federica might experience? A couple of people are typing, that's great. Yep. Yolanda, yeah, absolutely. If they're needing to access particularly content online, poor broadband, poor Wi-Fi. Technology working properly, Carol, yep. Absolutely. Poor PDS, absolutely, Matt. I think, yep, you know, these are great suggestions. You're right about, you know, the challenges, documents that don't have structure, websites that aren't accessible, images that don't have alternative text descriptions, information in non-digital formats that need to be scanned so that they can access them, PDFs that are image only, as you said, Matt, they also then need to be scanned so that software can read it back, and we'll come back to that later. But in the meantime, let's think about the technology as an enabler. And let's think about the technology that learners use, both dedicated assistive technology, but also everyday tools that we all use, really provide us with clear digital diversity. And different media or offer different benefits to learners. And I think one of the core factors for institutions as they develop their digital diversity is to consider how they're doing so in ways that don't create unnecessary challenges or disadvantage students with barriers to learning. And if we just think very quickly, as I say, we're not going to go into too much depth about the sort of technology, just as a frame of reference that people might use, maybe people with vision loss might use. We've talked about screen reading software. We've talked about, you know, JAWS for Windows. I know that's something that obviously Matt is very experienced and knows about. Federica used JAWS. Vikram used the built-in Mac voiceover feature. Another option, there are a variety of screen reader options, but another option that some students have used was one called non-visual desktop access, which works with Windows and is available in a number of languages. And this can be downloaded free of charge and run also on a portable drive. And I've spoken to some young people in the past who've said that quite often if their commercial sort of screen reading software goes on the blink, they'll refer to NVDA to get their other screen reading software back up and running again. So it's something that, again, non-visual desktop access has been a tool that there's quite a good information on the website where there's guidance about how you could use NVDA as a screen reader to check the accessibility, for example, of your websites. Magnification tools come in various options: handheld, portable, desktop. They can change colour contrast, capture images, can offer distance viewing, capturing information that might be far away, for example, in a lecture. Some magnification tools offer optical character recognition as well, that convert text formats, images of text into a format that can be read back. Things like keyboard pointers, cursors that can be made larger, keyboard add-ons, keyboard overlays that can make them easier to read or to access. We saw images of portable braille displays that can be Bluetooth to mobile devices, giving the students or users tactile feedback. So many of these features, potentially are really useful, and we'll think about things that are hidden in plain sight as well. But I think it's worth saying that if people are interested in learning more about assistive technology, I know that the Site Village events are coming up, I think over the next few weeks, in Glasgow, the Marriott Hotel on the 25th of April, and Edinburgh Hilton on the 26th of April. And I understand that in Kirkcaldy there's an event on in the Adam Smith Theatre on the 3rd of May as well. So that might be of interest to some people if you want to look more at the kind of current developments in assistive technology. I think one thing that that's useful to think about is what's hidden in plain sight as well, and to look at what's available in the everyday tools that we use. And there are some fantastic low vision accessibility features hidden within our computers. I'm using a PC, but as we've heard, Macs have some really useful features as well. I'm going to ask George if he wouldn't mind moving to screen share a minute, because I'm sure this is something that possibly you have seen before, but if you haven't, then I want to just show you how quickly and how easy it is to access universal access features on the PC. I'm going to just press my Windows control or Windows command button and my U. And I don't know if you can see this is popped up, and you can see the ease of access features in Windows. And there are a number of features, one of them being the magnifier. And if I click on the magnifier, it automatically comes up and I can change my viewing preference. So it moves around the screen with me. So again, there's some fantastic built-in features that can be really, really useful. But you've also got things like Windows Narrator, which is a lightweight screen reader. It doesn't read back a lot, but it can do so. So yeah, as you can see, this is just a screen grab of a document where using the ease of access features, we've been able to magnify and change the colour contrast. So again, there's some fantastic tools which are built in. However, the question, I suppose, is how do we make sure that learners can access these ease of access features wherever they need them? Is this something that people know about? Is this something that staff who work with students with vision loss, or indeed with other barriers to learning, know exist? What happens when a student wants to access that on a number of machines? Some organisations have been able to access roaming profiles, which means that students can access these ease of access features whenever they log in. So I guess that's a question about an organisation and how an organisation might go about making sure that people know about the built-in features in our computers that we use every day, and B, how do we tell people about them, and C, how can people access them wherever they need them. I just thought I'd provide this link to the My Web My Way. This is just provides some really useful information about how you can use and access some of these built-in features, so it's definitely worth referring to or sharing with other people, indeed. But also continuing to think about what's hidden in plain sight. If we think about web browsers, we talked earlier about learners accessing information online. It's good to think about what's hidden in plain sight. Browser add-ons and extensions can really augment and add value to the experience for people accessing web pages. And here are just a couple of screen grabs that I've taken. One is an extension is called Theme and Font Size Changer for Firefox, which magnifies and enlarges the toolbar at the top. Another one which offers a high contrast feature. But there are loads and loads and loads of built-in or extensions and plugins for browsers that can be accessed, that can change the colour, highlight text, read it back. Add-ons like Claro Read for Chrome, Read and Write for Google Chrome, which might be of help for people with low vision. And I guess if we do discover add-ons and extensions, how do we go about getting them into our browsers? And I guess I wonder if this is something that anybody has explored. Is this something that anybody has looked at? Have you in your own organisation or in your own place of work looked at or used any add-ins, browser add-ins or extensions to make accessing the web easier for students? If you have, I wonder if you could add any comments to the text chat, please. It may be that you haven't, but it's just something that is certainly, I guess, quite often hidden in plain sight. People maybe aren't always aware of what's available. And I guess if you have, the question is, how easy is it to do it in your own organisation? Who do you need to speak to make this happen? And if you do provide add-ons or extensions to your browsers, where would students find them? And how would they know they existed? How would you tell them that they existed? Great, Carol. Yeah, so you haven't, but that's grand. Well, it's useful to look at that. Certainly at the end, I'm going to provide a series of links to some guides and resources that might help in this particular area. It's interesting, I spoke to an ESOL librarian just a few weeks ago who was very aware of a lot of plugins and add-ins that she really wanted to take advantage of to support her students in terms of their literacy support. Her frustration was that the system was wiped every night, so that any add-ons or extensions that she had enacted were just wiped away. So these are the kind of organisational challenges I think that are really important to consider as well. I guess the other thing to think about then is, what about exploring the mundane technologies that we use every day? We've heard from Federica and Vikram, who both use their assistive technologies, if you like, their low vision and their no vision commercial and specified assistive technologies. But what about accessing? We've heard about them accessing apps for their finance, for their WhatsApp, for their social networking. What's interesting for me is my colleague interviewed Robin Christofferson, who some of you may have heard of before. He's the head of digital inclusion at AbilityNet. So when she spoke to Robin a couple of years ago, she asked him about the technology that he uses. And at the end, she asked him what was the most useful app that he had used. And she was quite surprised because he said Skype. And Robin does a lot of travelling and a lot of speaking at conferences and events. And basically the reason he said this was because if he turns up at a station or an airport that he's never been to before, he Skypes his wife. He turns the screen down so she can see where he is, and she directs him with his guide dog in the right direction. When he goes to meetings, he simply gets out a Bluetooth keyboard that's linked to his phone. He makes his notes directly onto his phone, and his phone stays in his pocket, and he simply emails these notes to himself and gets his notes organised once he's back in the office with a laptop. So it's interesting, this image, Jo Morrison, who was the founder of the founding creative director of Future Lab, she talked about the mundane technology and pointed out that mobile devices, digital technologies are often hiding in plain view, but at the same time they're integral to day-to-day learning and creative practices. So these are kind of technologies that are hidden in our pocket, technologies that are hidden in the browser, as we discussed earlier, technologies that are hidden in plain sight. So if we think about the mundane technologies, we've already talked about this, but they allow you to magnify text, to have text read back to you, to speak to you, to use the built-in camera, to Bluetooth to a display as we can see in the image, to navigate differently using gestures or swipes or keyboards. There's so many, I guess, really useful features in the technology that many learners use every day. And I guess the question is, and it's something that I think was mentioned earlier, particularly Yolanda mentioned it, what about Wi-Fi or access to connectivity? What about your organisation's bring your own device policy? How do these institutional policies either enable or potentially provide barriers to learners who want to use their everyday tools? And I'm just going to refer this to you because it might be something that you would be interested in looking at later. This is maybe 9 or 10 minute video of Matthew. Matthew is a student who has low vision, and he is passionate about his Apple products. He uses his iPad, his iPhone, his Mac, I should say, to access all his coursework. He talks about the universality of the Apple system, the interoperability, so that the same swiping features on the trackpad on his Mac are the same as he would swipe when he's using his iPhone, his iPad. And for him, with very little knowledge, he can access his multiple devices and get much more work done. He uses a Zoom, VoiceOver, colour inversion, and accesses a lot of his course material in cloud-based tools, which means that he can, get them on all his devices. So I guess, if we summarise digital diversity, we're really looking at ways that technology can help us to differentiate our learning. And it's just thinking about that, it's thinking about a cooking analogy, if you like. If you add all these different ingredients and, variety of ingredients, it really gives you a much richer resource, which allows you to create a much wider range of a repertoire of cakes, resources, food, technology, learning for students. And another interesting example of this is Jisc run a project, an initiative called the Summer of Student Innovation. And there's a really nice example, and I've listed it in our case studies later, of students at a couple of institutions in London who created an augmented reality app to provide visitors and prospective and current students with digital content to help them find their way around the university campus. Now, this example wasn't designed for people with vision loss, but you can really see the potential for students with vision loss if, apps, augmented reality, QR codes, and all sorts of other tools allow learners to access not just their learning, but their environment in lots of different ways. So, moving on. If we think about content clarity, we've provided our learners with the assistive technology that they need. The question is, shouldn't that software then solve the problem? But I guess the question is, unless we create information inclusively, it runs the risk of being inaccessible to many people because we have to go and retrofix. Now, in terms of content clarity, making information accessible to the widest possible audience is a fundamental good practice. Providing accessible documents, accessible templates is something that's really, really important. Things like using heading styles will create more accessible documents, will enable people who use assistive technologies to engage and to access content better. And so these are the kind of things that we can think about that are hidden by our influence, if you want. And if we think about that a wee bit more, let's think about accessibility without trying. What have we already got that we could do a bit better? How can we aim for a baseline where within our college or university or our organisation, being accessible is a default position? I know that creating accessible content is something that's going to be considered in future webinars, so I'm not going to go into too much depth here. But if we think about the fact that with a mobile phone, we've said you can magnify text, you can have it read back. With Word documents, you can select text, you can have it read back to you, you can magnify it, you can change colours. Again, with built-in Adobe Reader, PDFs can be made so much more accessible, particularly if they have been created, especially if they've been originated from a Word document that's been created accessibly. So hopefully more you'll find out more about this when the future session focuses on that. I would just like to refer quickly to the hidden gems that are in Adobe Reader. So from a user's viewpoint, Adobe Reader offers some fantastic functionalities. It allows you to magnify text. If bookmarks and heading structure has been created, no problem, Yolanda, thank you very much. You can navigate, you can magnify, you can reflow, you can listen, you can recolor. And Adobe Reader is really, really fantastic in terms of doing that. But, you know, creating accessible documents is a real important pivotal point in all of this. And this is just an example of why. And here's a student who was a screen reader user. She was a JAWS screen reader user. And she talked about how important it was to have heading styles in her Word documents and in the PDFs that she accessed, because if not, she couldn't access them. And I think that is such an important point. So if we think next at our available assets, you know, our everyday assets that we have in our organisations, our learning environments, our ebook collections, our websites could be the most inclusive tools within our organisation. We've seen how plugins can make a difference and how adding to what we've got can make a difference. But one thing that I want to talk about in the context of this is about alternative formats. Now, I don't know if anybody here has had experience of seeking or accessing information in alternative formats, but by this we mean electronic digital talking books, large print, audio, or ebook formats. And ebook formats have really become a massive benefit for learners who can, you know, access information in a more accessible way. And this image offers guidance. It's almost like a workflow, if you like, on how some institutions might want to access or have gone about accessing information in alternative formats. There's no single way of sourcing information in alternative formats. It very much depends on the nature of the learner, what they need, text-to-speech, screen readers, changing colour contrast, also what needs to be adapted. And I know that this is just, as I said, an example, but many, particularly higher education institutions, have looked at different ways that textbooks or reading lists have needed to be accessible. And I think that what's quite interesting is that sometimes it might be that content is available elsewhere. So if it's a particular book that needs to be accessed or part of a book, the first process is finding out if an accessible version already exists. And so, you know, what's been fantastic is that resources and services like the RNIB Bookshare offer fantastic not guidance, but also, I guess, support in accessing curriculum in alternative formats. They have a service where they have been involved in creating resources and adapting them into accessible formats, but they also provide a service where if other organisations have created an alternative format, that they could share their collection with RNIB Bookshare that can be shared elsewhere. The more recent copyright legislation recognises the time and money that institutions have spent adapting inaccessible versions. So if something is not available in its original format in an accessible way, people can create what they call intermediate copies. And very often those intermediate copies then can be shared using, for example, the RNIB Bookshare. But they're also trying to work with publishers like Sage, Manchester University Press and others to try and say, well, let's make sure that we can host accessible collections so that they're easier to find. Another area that might be of interest is asking other communities of practice. And there's a fantastic library accessibility mail list called the Liz Accessibility Mail List as well. So I just thought I'd show you this image because, interestingly, if no other accessible versions are available, some institutions have had to see, particularly universities, have had to see themselves going down the road of buying a hard copy and then basically stripping it down and having to OCR scan the book so that they can be accessible. But according to one of the universities, this takes typically 5 hours to scan a book and to quality check a 340-page book, and that's just so much time. So this image shows the scalps, if you like, of books that they've bought, they've had to unassemble and scan. So ideally trying to get access to things in alternative formats and electronic versions is the ideal. And a lot of institutions have found that iPads, iOS devices in particular, and the Kindle app has been particularly good because a lot of academic resources are now available in the Kindle app. So just moving on. One of the things that some institutions have done is try and look at mainstreaming, if you like, alternative formats. And there's a service called Census Access, which is a paid-for service, but it's some institutions have provided this, but rather than having it seen as a disability tool, they've created it as a kind of resource that library staff host, library services host, but can be used by staff, by students right across their institution, which allows people to take one format and create it into another. So it's a self-service resource, which doesn't always place the responsibility of creating that alternative format with the disability service, but maybe with academic staff and others. So it allows a range of media to be converted into more accessible formats. Moving on quickly, if we just think finally about procurement, that's one of the things that I think it's really important to think about. Learners need accessible systems, but how do you know when you buy a website, when you buy an e-learning platform, when you buy your ebook platform, if it's going to be accessible? Do your procurement policies ask the question about whether or not your resources are accessible? You know, learners need resources in a range of formats. Should there be an organisational approach ensuring that your procurement policies ask key questions about how accessible resources are before they buy them, to make sure that your learners with vision loss can access them? And I just thought I'd reference this because thinking about ebooks, if it's something that you are using or your institution does access, a group of library staff and disability professionals from across the UK just last year decided that they would audit different ebook platforms, and using a sort of a range of questions about whether or not people could navigate, could access information by grabbing text and having it read back, changing colour, magnifying. They created this audit, and the great thing was they got publishers involved as well. So if you're using ebook platforms in your institution and you want to know whether they're accessible, this audit is a fantastic crowdsourced audit. I just want to finish off really by making reference to some examples. We spoke earlier about how resources and particularly technology, mobile technology, can be fantastic, and these are just some examples that you might want to refer to later, but it just highlights the fact that particularly mobile devices can really be a fantastic way of accessing resources, and VoiceStream was one particular app that a lot of institutions are using on ebooks, which provides really fantastic readback features. So these might be useful for you in terms of looking at ways that technology can help. I just want to also make reference to some resources that Jisc can offer, some guides, some blogs, and some other resources which might be of help. And finally, some other references as well about low vision and no vision apps and software. And finally, I just want to say thank you for your time. As it has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I do appreciate that, and we probably have run over time. But I hope that's given you a kind of overview, if you like, of not just tools and technologies that might be of help to learners, but also the importance of our institutional processes and our policies and the kind of strategic approaches that need to sit behind what learners use to access their learning. Thank you.